Well, we thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. And of course, to set the mood for our discussion on COVID-19 gradual reopening of the economy part 2, let's watch the excerpts from Monday's program as compiled by Abdulmalik Adio.
Both lives and livelihood are very critical. So what we are proposing, at least in the private sector, is for us to come up with the right kind of framework, possibly sector-specific framework on how we can, deal with the issue of managing the protocols for each of these sectors, so that we can manage the spread and support the containment strategies of government. For me, this is the way to go, because this pandemic is not something that will go away anytime soon, and we cannot perpetually continue to lock down critical sectors of the economy.
With regards to the easing of lockdown, I will say that we are not doing well with managing the issue of responsibility, especially with regards to how people have decided to flout the several protocol that has been set both by government and industry operators.
We must note one very important point about the relationship between, the health of the people and the health of the economy. The health of the people is very important. In the same way, the health of the economy is important. They mutually reinforce each other. But there cannot be a trade-off, between health of the economy and health of the people.
The central bank has said they are coming up with some stimulus, and government is coming up with various stimulus packages. My suggestion, number one, is to give stimulus to, as much as possible, small-scale business people. That is by giving them loans that are of lower interest rates, by waiving a lot of charges, and this has been done in some cases. That needs to be done.
The IMF has, projected that the economy is going to tank by as much as 3.4%, even worse than the world average of 3%. And the extent, of course, that's a forecast. The extent to which this happens will depend on how long we prolong this lockdown. The budget is has a deficit of 5.3 trillion. The 2020 budget, meaning government is going to borrow so much, this year, in addition to the money they said they'll get from privatization, okay? And that money needs to be injected into the economy to stimulate activity. So that also means that we need to relax this thing, gradually.
All right, now those were excerpts from our conversation on reopening the economy on Monday. We have guests with us here in the studios as well as at remote locations to join us into this second part of the conversation. First, let's welcome Rabo Saleh. Rabo Saleh is President, Federation of Tourism Associations of Nigeria. Pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Also here with us in the studios, regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, Professor Ken Ife. Professor Ken Ife, of course, is an economic analyst. Professor Ken Ife, delighted to have you again on the program. That's right.
Yes, and joining us from our studio in Kaduna, Issa Aremu. Issa Aremu is the Vice President, Industry Global Union and member, National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, Kuru. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigerians, and I want to say Ramadan Kareem to everybody.
Okay, and on Skype from Lagos is Captain Roland Eyayi. Captain Eyayi is the former Managing Director, Nigeria Airspace Management Agency. It's also a pleasure to have you join us this morning on the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, once again, I'd like to have you join us on this conversation. Let's begin from our Abuja guest, Professor Ken Ife. The easiest statement to make about the coronavirus is that it has totally destabilized the macroeconomic environment with a huge impact also on the macroeconomic environment. So how do we begin to reawaken the economy, having suffered the kind of massive disruptions that are virtually unprecedented in our economies for several decades?
Two general principles before I go to what I think could be done. One is we need to start looking at what kind of balance we need to have between the level of fatality that we can accommodate and the depth of the recession that would follow. So you're going to have to watch how you balance that. I don't want to say trade-off, but you have to look at some sensible balance. And this balance is what many countries are trying to find. You've seen that as they're opening, the debt is increasing, but they're going to find a balance. For Nigeria, we don't have social security like in UK and America, where government is dishing out money for them to stay close. But we will have to find a balance. The second one is that we also have to find a balance between the level of intervention and the size of the recession that you're actually having. For some, it's going to be depression. In other words, how does your level of intervention relate to the depth of the loss in output, aggregate output, and loss in aggregate demand? Just to give you an example, America has put in about 3.2 trillion, which is about 16-17% of their GDP. UK 320 billion, 15% of their GDP. Japan 20% of their GDP. If you add everything the government promises and CBN promises, about going to about 5 trillion. That's about, even it could be more than 5 trillion, 6 trillion, but that's about 4 or 5% of our GDP. So the question is that we probably have to look for more money. But it's beyond that. You have to come and look at how are we actually drilling down and spending the ones that are on the table. Because I've had 50 billion, which is in microfinance bank, how slow it is in getting to the people. But there are good steps are being taken. Then, on the general theme, there are 4 key areas of intervention that will decide how quickly we can open up. One is we are aware of the level of fiscal measures, so monetary measures, humanitarian measures, and the overall control of the whole situation of public health by the FTA, the task force, presidential task force. Then the second area is how are we going to support the industry, the businesses, and I'm glad Rabo is here because his industry is hit very hard, and they don't seem to have a champion that is raising the profile of their case. They are connected to aviation strongly. Now, how are we going to support those small businesses? Because these are the people that are losing the jobs, losing the output, losing the demand as from government. But the government workers are getting their salaries, but these people are not getting their salaries. The third one, very critical, I haven't heard people say about this. What are you going to do about protecting the health of the workforce as they go back to work? There are prevention protocols. There are what we call COVID-19 and occupational safety, health and security. That is an implementable regulation. And it's huge number of protocols there that have to ensure that as they come back, that the government, they take individual responsibility, companies take their own responsibility, and they work in a safe manner that reduces death at the workplace. Okay, all right, then finally, dialogue. There has to be a high degree of social dialogue. I'm glad Rabo is here because we need to have dialogue between the organized private sector and the captains of the PTF so that we will all agree on the template for reopening. I have suggested 5-stage template. We can reduce it to 3 stages. Stage 1, which businesses should open in stage 1? How are they going to be monitored? Now bring the state governments to superintend on the implementation of those. If they are not ready to go to stage 2, the state governor will say we are not going to stage 2 because you have not complied with stage 1. So all of this will be done by state. You get the governors in. And the state federal government can't do it all. You have to get the governors in, but you have to have a template that is agreed with the organized private sector.
Yeah, well, what I've just said was what was applicable in the U.S., but at a point, the U.S. president was saying, look, that he has to call the shots. But on a second thought, we have to bring in the governors, just like rightly said, because each state has its own peculiarity.
Correct.
And even behavioral pattern in terms of human beings who are supposed to obey the protocols in question. Right. You know, because let's bring in Rebel Saleh here. You have already pointed out that your industry was hard hit within this period of lockdown, and it affected all facets of the industry, from normal transportation to aviation and what have you. And many persons who work in the aviation industry, not just in Nigeria but globally, have even lost their jobs already in the US and all of that. So now that we're trying to reopen, what should be your line of thought with respect to how that industry will be reopened, considering, of course, that we're still on the ascendancy with respect to COVID-19 cases?
Well, thank you very much. I think Prof has said it all, because he has tried to give us some stages in which we have to follow before we open up the economy. For us in the hospitality and travel industry, we are the worst hit. Worst hit in the sense that as we speak right now, all our businesses are all at a standstill. But we're hoping that gradually they will begin to reopen. And when they reopen, then we will see people coming back to business. But what has happened to these businesses before we even talk of reopening? As we speak now, a lot of people cannot pay salaries. Revenues have been lost. You cannot, I mean, there are people are not even going to their offices as we speak now. So, if we are talking of reopening the economy, then we have to put some things in place. We have to put some right steps in place. The stakeholders, particularly the investors, private sector investors in the country, need to be brought together. They need to sit together with the government and discuss, and let them look at and then see, how has this COVID-19 actually affected your businesses? How has it affected your operations? How do we come and help you so that by the time the economy is fully reopened, you can be able to go back and do your businesses successfully and also be able to progress in the future? Because if this is not done, which is the problem we're having, because since this thing started, for us in the private sector, in the hospitality and tourism business, nobody has invited us. We've written a position paper. We've tried to say, give suggestions of ways and procedures that are supposed to be followed for us to be able to come out, because we have pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 solutions, which we have written out. And we've said, okay, these are the steps that are supposed to be taken. If we don't follow them like that, then we're bound to run into problems, because already the businesses have been affected badly. Therefore, if we have to reopen the economy, because of the complexity that is already there, then there is the need for government and the PTF to bring the stakeholders together, sit down, have a dialogue, and try to understand, how have you been affected? How have you been affected? How can we come in to help you so that you can be able to continue, so that we don't continue to have job losses, and then losses in revenue, which at the end affects the economy and sends us into further recession.
All right, Rebel Saleh, thank you very much there for your opening comments. Let's bring in Captain Roland Iyaye. Captain Roland Iyaye is former managing director of the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency. Captain Iyaye, I mean, you have also been in the business side of the aviation sector, and aviation sector clearly high-tech and capital-intensive. You've been grounded now for well over 2 months. How easy will it be to refloat the aviation industry?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Let me just say this. The entire industry worldwide has experienced about 7 different crises, as it were, since 1945. We had the oil crisis in 1978. We had the Gulf War in 1990. There was a financial crisis in 1996. There was a 9/11 in 2001. You had SARS in 2003. There was a global depression, a financial crisis of 2008. And now we have a COVID-19. Now, to understand the severity of the COVID-19, the most severe of all the crises I've mentioned so far had been the 9/11. And at that time, the airlines in the world lost about 23 billion, as it were, in revenues. As we speak today, IATA had a review of their earlier forecast of about 63 billion to 314 billion just for the first quarter of 2020. Now, that should tell you the existential threats that the COVID-19 poses for the industry. Now, when we talk about where we are in the domestic market, all the airlines have shut down. Most airlines have put all their staff, about 60 to 70% of their staff, on furlough without pay, meaning that they've been asked to go home without pay. We have a situation where those who have asked them to stay on have had their salaries slashed to about 30%. The reality is the airline business is a cash business. When airlines are not flying, they're not earning. When they don't earn, they cannot sustain. I doubt very much if we have airlines in Nigeria with cash reserves for at least 3 months, which is like the normal or the standard worldwide. That said, it means that for us to talk about a reopening, a lot of airlines will find it very, very difficult to come back on. Another thing, all this period, whilst the airplanes are grounded, there's a requirement that means that you must have these airplanes, serviced, which is called active storage. It means that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, even though they're not flying, the engineers are required to do certain things on these airplanes to make sure that by the time you're ready to fly, they're still airworthy. So these are things that will cost the airline money all through this pandemic. And there's no sure way of saying that the monies will come back. Now, by the time you talk about reopening the airspace, the next major challenge the airlines will have is that of, rebuilding the confidence in the traveling public. Now, how do we get to do this? A lot of people will be telling you that, look, with the way things are, this particular COVID-19 is very infectious. How am I safe getting on an airplane as soon as they say, well, it's time to go? So what we see is a situation where the passenger load factors will be extremely low over the next 6 months, so to speak. If we take the fact that the 9/11 took about 6 months to recover, and that is not a health pandemic, I can say to you factually that it will be very difficult for us not to see a recovery spanning at least 12 to 18 months in this particular instance. And in that time, it is almost certain airlines will go bankrupt. I can only say this now because as it is, in the UK, major airlines are already shouting bankruptcy. As a matter of fact, one airline has gone bankrupt since March, Flybe. So what we're going to see in the country will be no different. And except, of course, an airline is financially stable, and very few airlines are in Nigeria, that's a reality, we will see failures. Now, when we talk about the real estate of the airports, when it comes to the reopening of the businesses, when you talk about the social and physical distancing we're talking about today, what it means is the airports will have to now have spaces on their floors to indicate the actual location or position passengers will need to stand so that we can maintain the protocol of social and physical distancing. Now, when you talk about that, what you end up doing is that you're now quadrupling, the real estate that's required for the passengers to come in there. What it means is that you have extended queues outside of the terminal buildings for you to be able to maintain the protocols. How do you sustain that? Now, it means that the airports authority will have to deploy additional aviation security personnel. And now the aviation security personnel will need to be trained, not just in people or vehicular movement and the control, but also emergency evacuations, which could happen. So we're talking about a major undertaking, and I'm not sure at this particular point in time we are well equipped to deal with it. But having said that, it is something that a lot of countries are doing on the go, meaning that nobody's had this experience in the past. So what we're trying to do basically is that we're trying to figure out things as we go along, and that's probably going to be what's going to happen when businesses open. But the reality is, the industry will take over the next 12 to 18 months to recover.
Well, well spoken, right? Because that's an expert, analysis, based on his experience, because the scenario that you have painted, especially with respect to September 11 incident that nearly, crippled the aviation industry, what you have said is just apt. We'll come back to you as we make progress in this conversation. Kingsley, he was talking about airports.
Mm-hmm.
We have Nigerian airports. They are not big. They are not large. Compared to other airports across the globe. For you to even try to, obey the protocol with respect to passengers traveling, you will find out that in our own circumstance, we may have to have people staying in an on-pandemic proximity at the airport, based on the size of the airport that we have.
I like that, on-pandemic.
On-pandemic proximity, exactly. Right. So now let's go to Kaduna rather, where we have Isaremu. Sir, you are a member of the National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, and there's no saying the fact that we are in a very difficult mix, healthcare versus economic development. And the precarious situation calls for advice from experts like you. Now, we want to reopen the economy. That's what the direction the government is going, just as the other nations are doing. And there may be, in fact, there should be precautions and, of course, necessary steps to be taken. Let's share your view on such steps with respect to strategy, of course, that will see us through opening our economy gradually but steadily.
Well, Kira, let me, through you, also appreciate all the other panelists who have really made their opening remarks, and I think they've already also set the tone in terms of the possible strategy. We are going to gradually ease out the economy. But I want to pick on one important concept used by Professor Ken. I think he says so loudly that whatever options we are going to take, there must be the need for appropriate balance, and I like that very, very much, balance. And I think in our narrative about the impact of COVID-19 on lives and livelihood, we need some balancing, in the analysis that we are putting in place. I listened to you this morning, Kingsley. The background information you've given, the number is climbing. Nigeria now is over 6,000 mark. We've recorded more deaths, about 192 deaths. Of course, globally, well over 4 million infection rates. That's good, but it's also good to have a balance in terms of statistics about the impact on the economy. This is very, very important. Also about livelihood. And when we talk about economy, it's easier to talk of global economy moving into recession and at times into depression. I think we should also look at the statistics on the impact of human welfare. And the ILO keeps statistics on this. There is ILO Monitor, which all of us should not close our eyes into. Close to 25 million workers are possibly going to lose jobs with the impact of COVID. ILO has said so. And with the loss of income of 3.4 trillion naira. Because when we talk of economy, we also forget that the workers' productivity and incomes are part of the backbone of the economy. ILO says that if 25 million workers lose jobs, as many of them are already losing at a faster rate, the estimate is about 3.4 trillion naira. No, what I'm saying here is that we can't have a appropriate strategy if we have balanced discussion about what the statistics look like. And I agree very well that out of the way out, again, I think Ken's concept of balancing is important. But the point I want to add to it is that there's already historic imbalance. If we have to be a bit analytical, Oxfam released a report this year that just 2,000 billionaires in the world control the wealth that is more than the wealth of 4.5 billion humans on Earth. You already see some level of inequality. Now, COVID has perpetrated inequality more. More jobs have been lost by workers. They've lost income. There is massive poverty. Now, if you are going to have balanced policy, I think you must also factor this historic imbalance, which means in your support, yes, it's important to support businesses, but don't also forget that businesses are run by working people, who already are in a depressed state even before the COVID. The minimum wage you are talking about 30,000 naira. In real terms, in 2015, that had more value than we have now with the level of devaluation of the currency. So what I'm saying here is that I would like to pick on that, on the issue of balancing. And I think Kay also raised a very important point. As we're easing out, and I think that is why the point is all about, it's not one or the other. We must protect lives, but we must also return to livelihood, about productivity. But in doing so, we should have an eye on safety. And I think Professor Ken also referred to occupational health and safety. And let me wrap up on this opening remark to say that even before COVID-19, given my labor background, I can tell you that the world of work has not been so romantic. ILO also estimated that 15 seconds a worker dies in the world of work. In fact, we have lost more lives to occupational hazards and health and safety than even wars. Worldwide, millions of workers are dying every day due to occupation. So what I'm saying, what COVID-19 has done is that we can't shy away. We must return to production. And I agree with Manufacturer Association and co. We must return back to production. But the issue is that what production? How do we carry it out? And I think those are the challenges that is in our hand. And I think, again, Professor Ken, I think you've taken all the concepts from me. We also need social dialogue. I think there should be more discussion between business and organized labor. There should be community discussions, dialogue, how do we get it out? And I think to manage this transition, that requires a lot of enlightenment. This is not the time for engaging in acrimony, war of attrition, because if you operate separately, COVID will defeat all of us separately. And we can see, Kisley, we just opened up within the three weeks because of a lot of indiscipline. You can see that the number is climbing. And as Kire said, it's not yet receding. I think we need cooperation, we need collective effort, dialogue to make sure that we gradually, and that's why I like your team, the issue is systematic reopening of the economy. And I think we can have targeted reopening. Farmers must resume back immediately to work. It's very, very important because this is the time for planting. We can't combine health insecurity with food insecurity. That would be disastrous, as the case may be. And I think you should also look at critical sector of the economy where the labor intensity is very high. We need to produce the PPE. I think that's what we call it, personal protective equipment, things like nose masks, I think that's part of the textile garment, sanitizers, the chemical industries, all the medical facility we need to provide. And I think CBN has also said a good template, Governor Emefiele has set very good template, targeted financing for those sectors. I think gradually those sectors that will determine our survival, we should have gradual reopening. But anyway we want to do so, we need discussion, we need dialogue. It's not a law and order affair. I can see a lot of frustration, those who are violating the rules. It's not to arrest them or pin them. We need to explain, we need to educate them. Nobody asked for this COVID. It's not something that we all prepare for. And I think we need that understanding and gradual way to be able to manage the reopening so that we move from lockdown to reopening without counting dead bodies, but improving on productivity, as much as possible. But I want to say that even the world of work, even before COVID, has not been all that peaceful the way we know it. But yet, we are surviving to manage it. And I think now we need to do it far more better in a gradual way.
All right, Comrade Isaremo, thank you very much there for your comments. Well, gentlemen, I mean, listening to the very many interesting perspectives that you have all raised and the issues that we still have to discuss, I doubt if we can exhaust all the issues today. But Kyrian, I think it's advisable before we begin to drill down into some of the key points raised, whether in aviation or tourism or labor or the macro and microeconomic environment that Professor Ken Ife earlier indicated. There's something here. Now, the PTF, that's the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, was set up essentially as a response to a public health challenge. There are a number of issues in the ideas that you have proposed here, and we believe a number of ideas that are also out there. I mean, if you listen to the technical issues outlined by Captain Roland Iyayi and the tourism matters outlined by Rabo Saleh, and what you have also said, Ken Ife, with regard to the 4 broad areas that we need to tackle, with the greatest respect to the PTF would not appear to be, in terms of its composition, sufficiently equipped to tackle all of these issues with regard to reopening the economy. Yes, even though it provides the lead in terms of advisory work to the president on the public health challenge and whether to reopen the economy or not, so that we know to whom we are addressing these recommendations and so on and so forth. What would you like to see? Is this a matter? The NBS has not been mentioned in all of this. NBS being National Bureau of Statistics. It's not been mentioned so that we have the numbers that may come out of that. There is the Economic Sustainability Committee headed by the Vice President. But are these issues that should be going to the Economic Sustainability Committee or matters should be going to the PTF so that we have this healthy balance that we're talking about? So what is the mental infrastructure that we should tap into the ideas that we'll be discussing before we get into further details?
Well, last week, I think it's on Thursday, I had an interview, similar interview with Channels Television. And I actually said to them that they should use their convening power, the media power, not just to be taking complaints from the public, but to actually get the organized private sector, MAN, NASIMA, NASI, NASME, NESG, and NECA, and of course yours as well. Get them in a video conference to share these ideas. I actually sent them the strategy, COVID-19 strategy for ECOWAS and for Africa Union. So I sent that copy to them, and then also sent them the 5-stage plan for reopening. I said, dialogue with these 5, 4, 6 agencies and let them come to an understanding, then take that and get the 3 important ministers involved in the conference: agriculture, FMITI, and I think petroleum or something like that. I said, get them in so that you have a buy-in, and then they can go and talk to the Sustainability Committee and talk to the Presidential Committee. So within that axis, there could be an understanding on how we're going to move forward. But bear in mind, governors will have to implement. So the governors forum or chairman must be in the loop if they're going to implement that. And they have to implement that. And in fact, I heard yesterday, I think the national coordinator in the PTF said, you guys can't let us do it all by ourselves at the federal level. He's still saying the same thing. They can only do so much. In the end of the day, it is the governor that will rein in all the defaulters and compliance issues on this. But working with the industry to ensure that we are following a map. There must be a map, a roadmap on this. And that's the point. That talks to what we have asked.
That's we're now talking about. Look, how do we get all of these strategies? How do we get all of these suggestions into a national strategy for reopening the economy?
Exactly, yes. And that's why I want to go to Rabo Saleh to speak to this. Which Professor Ken Ife raised earlier on. He talked about social dialogue. Right, and there should be a kind of collaborative mechanism among all the committees or task forces as case may be, because the Kingsley was talking about how do we direct, who do we direct this to? Who are the final gatekeepers that will ensure that whatever ideology put in place in this reopening exercise will be effective? Meanwhile, we have not even spoken about bailout, because some sections of the economy must be bailed out. Otherwise they will come to a halt. Right. So what should be the best form of approach in this direction?
Thank you very much. I think the best form approach in this form is for the organizations that the government has set, because the government has already set up different bodies that are responsible for certain actions. The PTF is there, the Sustainability Committee is there, the Central Bank too has been asked to take some responsibility, and then there's the other committee of ministers that the federal government set up to look at all, to come up with a roadmap for the economy. I think all these, activities of all these bodies should be coordinated together so that at the end of the day there will be no conflict of interest, or one will not say that, okay, I don't know where to go to or who to approach for what. If there's coordination and there's a synergy amongst all the organizations and all the bodies, they will be able to streamline a direction for us. Just like we have said, if we're going to move out of the gradual lockdown, it cannot be all at once. It has to be in stages, because if we don't handle it in stages, at the end of the day, we'll create more problems where there are not supposed to be problems. So if there is that understanding amongst all the organizations that are already discussing or have been given responsibility of this is what you are to do, this is what you are to do, then they should be able to get all the bodies, either private sector or some other government organs, to come sit down with them and then have a discussion with them and then have an understanding of what do these people really want and how do we, satisfy or meet up their demands, so that at the end of the day, when we have this, unlock the economy, then it's not going to create any additional problem for us, either in terms of affecting people maybe when they go back to work and there's no proper arrangement on social distancing, no proper arrangement on health care. Then at the end of the day, you keep having, a more compounded problem. Like the hotel industry, for instance, it has been under lock. If you ask people to go back to work, there are so many people working there, and there are also guests there. You can even look at it and say, okay, instead of opening it up completely all at once, then the workers can come in batches, so that you reduce the number of people at the workplace, so that you reduce if there's going to be any effect. The same thing with the airports. For the travel agencies, the tour operators, right now tourism cannot flourish very well because there's a complete lockdown. So we believe that probably we start, saying, okay, let's promote domestic tourism. Let's encourage Nigerians to move. Even if we encourage Nigerians to move within Nigeria, we have to do it, gradually. And we have to also guide them on the number of people that will be at a place at a time, so that we don't end up having so much congestion and then creating additional problem.
All right, Sabo Saleh, thank you, Rabo Saleh, rather. Thank you very much there for your comments. Let's also listen to Captain Roland Iyaye. Captain Roland Iyaye, I mean, your industry is always in the news, but these are exceptional circumstances. And considering the number of points that you have raised, and I believe your colleagues also have other ideas, who should be the target audience of your messaging, so that you get the appropriate response and then get your sector reopened? Would you use the instrumentality, for instance, of the many organizations as listed by Professor Kenife, such as NASIMA, LCCI, or the NSEG, that's the Economic Summit Group? Who will be the person or the organization or institution or establishment that has the best listening ear and therefore can activate whatever suggestions you have, brilliant as they are?
Very much, Kingsley. For aviation, really, the way aviation works, I mean, we have international standards. The Civil Aviation Authority is actually the arrowhead of the industry. They are the regulators. Now, when we talk about aviation, we cannot take it as as an island unto itself. I mean, it's part and parcel of the entire economy. As a matter of fact, it's the enabler of the economy. Now, I think looking at what the government has done to date, the government has set up the PTF. Now, all the discussions we've had, I mean, right now presupposes that even though we had the lockdown, somebody in government had thought about the fact that at some point we would open up this economy again. Now, I want to believe that somebody was proactive enough to say, look, how do we reopen? Now, I would assume that the PTF, being the driver of all government actions through this period, can actually be used as also the vehicle to take us out of lockdown into graduated opening up of the economy. Now, I mean, how does that work? The PTF is comprised of key ministers in the industry, the secretary to the government. So I think if at that level they can break down into little subcommittees to address specifics of different areas of the economy, and then come back together based on all the ideas that the different subcommittees will bring to the fore, then I think that probably will be a better vehicle to use to address it. In terms of the industry, like I said, aviation cannot be a standalone industry. It has to be integrated into the overall plan. And I think it would be a good way to use the PTF as a driver for the opening up of the economy or the reopening of the economy, however you look at it. But having said that, we go back to again what Professor Kenneth said. There is a need for to balance things. In as much as there's a need to open up the economy, there's also a need to understand that should you have a spike, then the objective will be defeated. So there's a need to look at what we need to do based on numbers that are showing up, which areas can be opened safely. And if they're opened safely, how do we ensure that we don't have spikes in other areas? Or how do we ensure that they don't create the spike, as it were, that we're trying to avoid at this point? So it's a very, very difficult situation. There's a dilemma there. But I also believe that, however we look at it, all the different facets of this enterprise need to come together, need to understand the nuances of each sector, and then take all that into cognizance to be able to come up with a plan.
Let's bring back Issa Aremu once again. Issa Aremu, I also like you to speak to that question put to Roland AI, because we are talking about several bodies, put in place by government, to address the pandemic, and of course, as we're now trying to ease the lockdown and so on. Now, how would all suggestions to this reopening plan be implemented? Which of the bodies do you think is in a better position, to ensure the implementation as we get on with the gradual opening? And I want to add this to that. Bailout system has become a new norm in resurrecting failed businesses across the globe. And of course, the negative impact of COVID-19 on the economy seems to have necessitated such approach. What would be your thoughts in that direction? Let's giving a bailout for perhaps the aviation industry and other sectors of our national economy hit so hard by COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Kiran. I think, just like you, I think, there have been a lot of initiatives to respond to the COVID pandemic, and you can list them. You have the monetary policy, initiatives. You have the fiscal authorities and the Minister of Finance, Madam Zainab, announced about 500 billion, naira, intervention, which is supposed to be backed up by the National Assembly legislation. And the whole idea is that even under this condition, we need to create more jobs in 774 local government. It's also part of the fund is also meant to turn around the pharmaceutical industry. You also know the kind of moratorium the CBN have put in place for different kind of loans for small and medium enterprises. If you also add the initiative from the state, so we have plethora of initiatives. But I also agree with you, it's now time to do what I call quality control of all these initiatives. We need to consolidate them. The sustainability committee headed by the VP, we need to harmonize that with what the monetary authority is doing, what the fiscal authority is doing. And this is where you need serious policy thinking, serious strategic thinking. And I think, Kiri, we are not short of ideas. I mean, I'm a member of National Institute, Gradual. You also have the National Defense College. There are a lot of studies that have been done historically where we had pandemic, how do we have gradual reopening of the economy. Even the recent one, we need to learn from what has happened in West Africa. Liberia, Sierra Leone, who are really down with Ebola. I mean, how did you have gradual easing? And Nigeria was also part of that process, so we can draw on it. But my quick thought on that would be that anybody that fails to plan will definitely plan to fail. And I think all the discussions we're having must also be in the context of the national vision that we have put in place. You know that we have the Economic Growth and Recovery Plan, EPRG, which has been in place. A lot of effort has been to review it this year. We need to know where we stopped when COVID-19 caught up with us. And there have been a lot of measures in that, and I know President Buhari has signed a lot of executive orders, 003, 005, which talks about the need for local patronage, the need for us to produce what we consume and consume what we produce. I think this is now the time to see how all those initiatives are tally with them. We also have, I don't know what has happened to Vision 2020, although we're already arriving at the year. I don't know nobody talk of this pandemic around this time. We also signed on to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. You know, so we are not sort of a framework under which we need to either locking or gradually open out. But in doing so, my suggestion would be we need inclusivity or inclusion, let me put it that way. We have to engage more people, and when I listen to President Ken, you always mention Man, Nasima. I think, Nigeria is more diverse than that. We must also talk of organized labor. We must talk of women. We must talk of youth. We need policy dialogue, not policy monologue. It's very, very important. There's no way you can reopen the factories if the people who work there, workers, are not carried along. You must know what the framework is all about. You must retrain them, retool them, but you can't, as late Abiola said, you can't shove any human being behind his or her back. You have to, everybody must be on the table. So, but I want to say that we have a national framework. Above all, we also have a constitution. 1999 Constitution without limitation talks of welfare and security of citizens. It has a robust position on health and safety. We must also see how we can take care of the vulnerables. Nobody talks of pensioners under this condition, the old people, all the numbers of people that are dying. A good number of that, those people have underlying challenges. How do we take care of them? Why you need to bring them on board. So I want to say that we are not short of those ideas. This is the time to dust the policies. For the EPRG, let me take the oil and gas sector, for instance. Even though we are caught up now with the sharp decline in the crude oil price, but in that EPRG report, which is very, very good, and we are part of the process that put it in place, it talks of reducing importation of petroleum products by 80% by 2019. As I'm talking to you now, we are still importing wholesale. It's easier for NMPs to say you have removed subsidy. I don't think that's what Nigeria wants to listen to. What they want to listen to are the refineries coming on board so that we stop this hemorrhage of scarce foreign exchange, which is no more the importing product that ordinarily we ought to have produced. And that's the one that putting pressure on the foreign exchange. Let's release those resources now to reinvent public health, to reinvent those sectors that we can employ more and generate more foreign exchange. So, in summary, I think we need to return to planning. we need to return to visioning, and we have some framework already there to get it done. So any gradual reopening must be within the overall context of national vision, which will include both the federal, state government, private sectors. In this case, we need to, it's not just business people. And I think the last one, period, on bailout. And that's the point I was trying to raise at my opening remark. If care is not taken, you may do bailout in which you are also, in a very unfair manner, reward those who are already over-rewarded. The whole idea is now reward businesses, reward big people. I understand we should give them more subsidy taxes, especially those who are going to keep workers as they are producing. But don't also forget the bailout should be for Nigerians, who are already poor. And the figures are there in the public domain. Close to 70% of our people are below poverty line. How do you have conditional targeted transfer to them? And not that we are doing a favor. It's good economics, because you must have effective demand. There's already collapse of demand in this country. The only way to get it done is put money in the pocket of people so that they can buy. If nobody buys, nobody will produce. And if you produce, nobody buys, there won't be recovery.
All right, Comrade Isaremo, thank you very much there for your comments. And indeed, gentlemen, we're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll look at the tweets and then return to the guests to get their closing thoughts. All right, you're welcome back at the state. Good morning, Nigeria, live on the network service of the NTA. Now, Kyria, just before we take the tweets, and while we are still on the issue of the bailout which you raised and Comrade Isaremo dealt with, I want Professor Ken Ife to also speak to this. I mean, you have various synonyms for it now: bailout, stimulus package, and then at the lower level, that's the bottom of the pyramid, you have the so-called palliatives. What should be the guiding framework, for targeted stimuli for various sectors? In taking that question, there are two observable phenomena already. One, there's a disruption in supply chain globally, and we are an import-dependent economy. Two, we're also seeing the almost wide fluctuations in the exchange rate, particularly the parallel market. I mean, the dollar is going for over 400 and something. That's, in a sense, almost at least 75 naira increase on the exchange rate. How do we reconcile all of this against the background to say, okay, you are designing a stimulus package or a bailout for a specific sector that also relies on imports?
I began by saying that there is a nexus between the level of intervention or bailout and the size of the recession you are prepared to tolerate. What I'm actually referring to there is the impact on the collapse of aggregate demand. In other words, you don't throw money, you throw money at something. What was the principle? First, before you start dishing out, you need to carry out an economic impact assessment on sectors. You had Mudaru Yusuf say that, sectoral impact assessment. And let me just give you one, because there is a nexus between the eloquence of what Captain Roland said on aviation industry, particularly the amplification of how it has hit the airlines. There's a nexus between that and Al-Haji here. He is representing an industry, an ecosystem. Now, whilst the aviation industry was expecting to go to 1.2 trillion this year as a target, there is another 3.6 trillion, 3 times the size of that industry. That is the ecosystem. And that's where he comes in.
Tourism.
Now, they support the hospitality industry, the travel, tourism, hotels, they support the aviation industry. Now, let's take the nexus between the two is FAN. FAN is government plus private, is the way it is. But it has 22 airports. Only 2 of the airports are viable. Abuja breaks even. Lagos earns 58% of the revenue. So Lagos revenue subsidizes the other 20 airports. If FAN is allowed to face more pressure, they can just close down those airports because they can't make money. And the captain has told us how much additional impact and pressure that all of these are going to have. They're going to be under more pressure. Now they are self-generating. So they're generating all their income. They're not getting money from the budget. So how much can they carry staff, carry retirees, in this very present circumstance. Then thirdly, they are being owed over 53 billion naira. If they go tough on people who are owing them, all these airlines will shut down because they are the ones owing them. So where do you find, you've got to understand the impact assessment on each sectors to now know how you respond with the palliatives and the
bailouts.
and the bailouts. So now remember, bailout is only one part of it, because bailout is more of the fiscal policy side. Although there are some monetary one, because monetary they are borrowing at a lower interest rate of 5%. So, but one good thing that the CBN has done by bringing out 50 billion, the 50 billion was going to go to household and also to MSMEs. Now, why is it very critical? It's very critical because if you decompose GDP on consumption, 84% of our consumption is household consumption. Government is only 5.7% consumption in the consumption. So the policy must allow resources to stay at the household level by pushing back what they have to pay for, like rent and all that lower interest rate, and then making sure money comes into the household. So what the CBN has done is to allow resources to go to them so that they can stay afloat. We don't have social security. We don't have any other way. So that's the kind of balance that we need to have in going forward.
Well, really a difficult balance, from what you have explained. It requires a high level of expertise, to be able to come to terms with what you have just with this analogy, that you have put in place. As a matter of fact, it's so complex, as Rabo pointed out earlier on, but it requires some level of intelligence, to approach this. Now, gentlemen, Nigeria belongs to the low or middle income economies, as the case may be, and this is also a country that relies highly on importation of goods and services at a very, very high level, which is not understandable to many Nigerians who had thought that, look, the nation would have advanced higher than it is now. Now, when it comes to manufacturing, we are at a very low ebb. That is why when COVID-19 came, we realized that so many sectors of our national life have been in comatose, so to speak, because they are not effective or efficient, right? So now we are trying to reawaken, the economy once again. In terms of manufacturing, in terms of local production, now we are looking inwards, to produce PPE and other materials, other medical supplies required to fight COVID-19. It also affects other aspects of our life. So how would the manufacturing sector be giving a kind of support or encouragement, financial and otherwise, to say, all right, we can step up our production or manufacturing capacity?
Yeah. The COVID-19, I think, has really, changed the way things are done. It has also changed the way we are supposed to even think. It has affected all facets of life. Therefore, this is an awakening, it's an awakening on the whole of the country. Because what we need to do now is to begin to think differently. How do we think differently? We have to begin to think that because this thing has affected us in this way, then we have to start thinking of organizing our manufacturing sector, our agricultural sector, even our health care system. Because we've come to discover that our healthcare system is in a complete comatose. We don't produce. Most of the things we have in Nigeria, we're always importing. So this is now a time for government to look at it, come together with the private sector, with the manufacturers, to look at how do we now get it right? How do we now begin to encourage local production? How do we now begin to encourage people to do things, to even consume things that we produce locally instead of importing or depending on imported items? The hospitality industry or the tourism industry, most of the time, we try to promote cultural activities, we try to promote use of local activities because we want to promote the local content. So in promoting the local content, we are also promoting our industry, which helps in bringing additional income to the people and to the government. Therefore, for us to be able to get it right, we have to think differently. We have to change the way we do things. We have to go into local production. We have to go into, manufacturing things locally and stop all this importation. We have to, stop, except things that are very key. There are certain, you can't say that, 100% you can produce everything, because no country is an island. But I think majority of the things, with all the vast resources that we have in Nigeria, with the manpower, with the whatever we have, we can produce things ourselves. We don't need to depend on China or any other country to import. So this is the COVID-19 has put us on an age now that we really need to wake up as a country to begin to do things ourselves, and we need to do it right, so that we can take our country out of the woods.
Very well, Rabo Saleh, thank you very much. I mean, Kirian, if you recall at the onset of the pandemic, part of the complaint was that if you went to the shops, you wouldn't get sanitizers, hand sanitizers. If you went to the pharmacies, they had run out of stock of face masks. But today, I'm not sure anybody's complaining about getting face mask or hand sanitizer. Everybody. So if those who went and hoarded hand sanitizers, I'm sure they are bringing them out.
Who hoarded them?
Yeah, hand sanitizers are all over the place. And some of them have very strong alcohol content, sufficient to kill off the virus. And then face masks, we all have different types. I mean, Kirian has this, and then our guests also have that. So there's a local response to that already, and there are many other things that we can also respond to, except of course, the downstream sector where we are a laggard, as it were, and our forest continues to go in that direction. Captain Roland Iyaye, I mean, tell us something. In the aviation subsector, you've articulated the key issues there, how it might be, what is required to at least keep the industry in name alive, and then what is required to get it up to fly again. Now, we have observed something in some other jurisdictions. Say the U.S., for instance, you have some flights, local flights still going on. Is this something that we can borrow from? Yes, there's community transmission. We know the hardest hit parts on the eastern coast of the United States, but there are still flights across the U.S. Can we have a gradual reopening of the aviation sector? Because we can't have this prolonged paralysis of that sector. That's one. And some of the very pertinent points relating to either indebtedness or regulatory issues. Will the airline operators be having a conversation, or are they already having a conversation with the regulators?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Essentially, let me quickly correct something that Prof said earlier regarding the unviable airports. Ordinarily, no airport should be unviable. I think the problem we have in the industry is one of policy. And if the policies are set right, every single airport in the country will be extremely viable. An airport, by design, is a small city. It is designed to provide unfettered market access. And if the market access is there, by virtue of the service providers using it, then we should not necessarily have any situation where an airport is termed unviable. I think that can be corrected by way of policy. Now, going to the issue of reopening, and then of course government support. A lot of conversation has been going on, I understand. A lot of what needs to be done in terms of reopening. Yes, certain flights were going on in the country, but those flights were actually rescue flights. There were flights meant to move around the country, essential materials for the relief. So they were not necessarily passenger flights. They were more like cargo flights. In terms of getting a bailout for the industry, there is indeed a need for substantial bailouts. But the truth is, and this is a reality, we're talking about a deficit budget. How do we fund a bailout? Those are not things that we can wish away, but at the same time, those are not things that we can realistically say at this point in time the government can actually do. But there are ways of dealing with some sort of relief for the industry. I'll give an example. we have 40% of an airline need being fuel. Today, the price of fuel has gone down, but we have not seen a commensurate decrease in the price of fuel at the pump for the aircraft. Now, if government took charge of ensuring that we can have fuel in the country at a rate that is highly subsidized, rather than provide funding to the airline, I think that would be more useful than having to say that you're giving actual bailouts to airlines. Because the truth is, if you're going to give cash to individuals or corporate entities, how do you justify it when certain other elements or certain other entities might not be given the same thing? So you're going to create some sort of chaotic situation when you're talking about bailouts. I think what the government should look at as an industry, rather than monetary doleouts, should be one of relief that would, impact the entire industry. Things like fuel, things like tax. Those are areas that the government can come in that would make sense.
All right, we did apologize for pausing you there because we're trying to manage the rest of the time that we have for the program, and we'd like to bring in Issa Aremu here. Issa Aremu, we talk about policy making, and we hear about policy somersault, policy summary. We also say about the policy surrender. I don't know, in Nigeria we have several policies, but sometimes they don't address the key and core issues. Is it a problem of the policy makers, or is it a problem of policy implementers? This is with respect to either production, manufacturing, buying Nigerian goods and what have you. Very briefly, please, sir.
Well, I think maybe to add to your the list of policy appellatives, let me add the need for policy push. And currently we have cotton, garment and textile policy, CTG, which was unfolded by President Muhammadu Buhari earlier this year. And interestingly, we've gotten some implementation. I think this is the time to get it and get it properly fully implemented. The Central Bank of Nigeria had organized memorandum of understanding between the remaining textile industries and all the uniform agencies. This is now the time. I think, Kingsley, you made the point, supply has been disrupted, but we can now take advantage. Nigerian customs uniform should be produced locally. The army uniform, the police, school uniforms. This is now the time to revive the textile industry, in which Nigeria used to have a comparative advantage. Direct 2 million jobs can be created in this sector. So we've already gotten and interestingly, it's already been implemented. Now we have moved from cotton deficiency now to cotton surplus. I think this is now the time to make sure that the cotton, spinning, weaving, and of course the entire value chain is reinvented. And I think that's the practical way to get out of this COVID logjam of dependency on importation. So I want to say that we've gotten some policy. All we need to do is to push the implementation. And I think more than ever before, we need to drive it. Of course, there's nothing you can do about manufacturing without electrification. There cannot be industrialization without electricity. We have to get the ball rolling, to improve the capacity for energy generation, because that's going to be a critical success factor for any effort for recovery. And I think.
All right, Comrade Aremu, sorry, we, as I said, pressed for time. Just very quickly now to go through the tweets that have come in from our viewers. Cecilia Okoroma, though very difficult, we can all endure, make sacrifices and readjust for this new normal lifestyle, and use community leaders to educate those at the grassroots for strict adherence to the coronavirus guidelines. And our economy will bounce back sooner than later.
KJ Olabaji said the reliance on oil is a problem. The agricultural season is gradually being lost unless we give hope to farmers. The manufacturing sector is worse hit due to supply and demand for both inputs and output. Can we still get out of the wood? Yes, if we can build sector resilience.
Now, Steve Bond tweets, with less than 50,000 tests in a country of over 190 million people, reopening the economy, most especially schools, should not be a hasty decision.
Festus Akimboewa says, while it is important to protect Nigerians from COVID-19, it's also important to protect the economy.
All right, Abogbala Humbab says the public needs constant enlightenment, and much as it is good to forestall another pandemic, that is hunger virus, it's equally important that people use face masks and observe social distancing.
Chris Simeon, no economy thrives well if there is lockdown. Federal government and the PTF on COVID-19 have done a nice job for directive giving for the gradual opening of the economy.
Law Alpha say relaxing the lockdown is germane, considering the sufferings experienced by the people, but mass testing should be aggressively embarked upon.
Yeah,
we see how Michael Ayankwo, Popola, Motayo, Onyebuchi, Ezenwa, Omar, we thank you, Ruben Nagebri. And then there's one from Lead Prince, by the way. It says the banks are not so much affected as other sectors. Government should prevail on banks to take a 50% interest rate cut on outstanding corporate loans.
All right, that's where we conclude our show today, but not before we appreciate our guests who made it possible for us to get next to you in terms of analyzing the topic. Rabu Saleh is, of course, the president of Federation of Tourism Associations of Nigeria. We thank you. Pastor Ken Ife, who's also, well, a regular here with us, we appreciate your comments as always. Thank you for coming. Isa Aremu, Vice President, Industry Global Union and member, National Institute of Policy